I'm so excited about this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yes, of course. I'm really excited to be here. And who wouldn't want to chat with you about writing?
Yeah, I could talk about it all day,
Yeah.
all day, every day. But anyway, so I just want to say a couple of things about you, Jules. So first of all, my friend Jules, I'm very proud to say. Also, my writing teacher, my writing coach. So you teach. I would say you teach Jack Grape's method writing, but you kind of made it your own as well. And I've been doing your classes for 2 years now, and it just astounds me. Great writing comes out of those classes. So, and I'm really excited to talk to you about writing and your process, because we talk often, don't we, about writing, but
Yeah.
not in this kind of detail. So I'm really excited to see what I'm going to find out about you as well already.
I'm quite excited to see what I'm going to find out about me too.
So is there anything that you wanted to add about what I've said about who you are before?
No, I think you've covered it. I can just share that I started studying with Jack Grapes, who created the Jack Grapes method writing program, which I teach. I started studying with him in 2003 when I was doing my master's thesis and wanted to write a novel, and so I started with Jack then, and now here we are all these years later. So no, I think let's jump into your questions.
Okay, but before I do that, one thing I did forget to mention was your book, because you are a published author as well. I absolutely love this book. I have a shelf of special books, and books have to earn their place on that shelf. And this book has earned its place on my special shelf. So I want to.
So thank you for that. Will you open it up so people can see the whole? No, the other way. There you go. So I was. So that painting is called Largo, Argentina, and it was painted by Lucas Reiner, who is Carl Reiner's son and Rob Reiner's brother, and he's a very amazing artist. And I was so blessed that he allowed me to use his painting for the cover. So let's give a shout out to Lucas.
It's such a lovely cover, isn't it, as well? So.
It really is. It's so pretty, isn't it?
And I know there's a whole story that I could ask you about that, but I want to get into my first question, which is really, how did you get started writing? I mean, was it when you first started working with Jack Grapes, or did it start long before that?
I know writing started long before that. I remember going through a very tumultuous breakup in the 80s, and I was in Leicester Square in London, and I just was feeling so much emotion that I was writing poetry to my ex-lover. So I feel like I've always written, but I haven't quite understood what I was doing. It's been an access point, an emotional kind of opportunity to speak to myself on the page almost. If my emotions are very activated, like in a happy way or in a melancholy way, writing seems to just be my best friend almost. It's like, I think I'm a quite sensitive person, so I've moved through the world at times a little overwhelmed, and so writing has helped me balance my equilibrium as a human being. So I mean, my mum might say that I was writing when I was younger. I think she's told me that she's found stuff that I wrote, but I wasn't ever aware of that because I never thought of myself as a creative person. I don't know, maybe some teacher someday told me, well, no, don't do that, Jules, do something else. And so I never really thought of myself as a creative person, but I always had a love of books. Yeah. But I didn't know I didn't know what writing product was, Ria. For me, writing was just an expression. Mm-hmm. So I did Julia Cameron's morning pages for years because that just allowed me to write 3 pages a day, indefinitely. I wasn't perfecting the craft of a writer by doing that, but at least I was creating a discipline of practice.
I think people listening might not know what you mean then between um, writing product and writing. So can you just say something about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I know a lot of people who write, and then they say to me, "Oh, but I'm not a writer." So, what does a writer mean? Somebody who's being published, getting paid, got an article in the New Yorker. And that seemed a place that I was never going to be. I was never going to be published. I was never going to write a book. Um, I was never, I was never, I was never, I was never. But writing is my friend. So that's what helps me negotiate through life. And even when I've written 2 novels, and even when I wrote my novels, I had no plans to do anything with them. One was when my dad passed away, and just so many extraordinary experiences happened during a very tumultuous time. And I wanted to write the story of saying goodbye to my dad. Now, whether it became anything or becomes anything is still on my shelf. It's really badly written. I'd have to go back and rewrite it, but the content was so huge at the time, I needed a place to put it.
Mhm.
So a lot of people sort of belittle the process, that their creative process, because they don't see themselves as creating product or being paid for their work. Um, I don't feel like that. I feel like, you're an artist, even if you're just doodling with art and paints at home. And I feel like you're a writer if you're writing, full stop.
Mhm. Yeah, because I wrote every day. I still do write pretty much every day. And but for so many of those years, even though I published a book, I didn't see myself as a writer. I knew I was a published author, and I know that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But because most of the time I'm just writing for my own benefit.
Yeah, I'm almost writing because I can't not.
Mhm.
And when I say that to people, they think, oh, well, I don't feel like that, so I'm not a writer then. There's not a lot of people I know that write because they can't not write. You're one of them. And I think that's what bonds you and I as friends, is we both understand that alchemy that we have with writing, but it's not a common thing. A lot of people, they lose themselves. One of the biggest things that people say to me who come to my writing program, when I ask them, why are you here, it's because, oh well, I have all these fabulous ideas, and sentences flow really well in my head, but the minute I pick up a pen, there's nothing.
Mhm.
And so so we think, oh well, I'm not a writer because I can't get what I want to say out into the world, whether it's just for me, whether it's for product. So there's lots of ways people stop themselves being creative. That's one of them. They can't find their voice on the page.
Mm. So this might tie into something later. I don't know yet, but I know I was reading a book written by a writer recently who said that something like they thought you were either a writer or you weren't. Like you could either write or you couldn't. And I don't think I agreed with that statement. I'd be really interested to see what you think to that. Do you think
Yeah,
anybody can be a writer?
I mean, if you can write, you're a writer.
Mm.
So it's like there's little children who can write. One of my students, her she sent me poems that her daughter's written, who's 12. I mean, I would say she's a writer. But people have it in their minds that, I mean, as human beings, we're so quick to sort of make ourselves less than something. And oh, I'm just a mechanic, or I just work in a shop. I don't have a proper job. Um, I'm not a writer, but I do write sometimes. The first thing we have to do is start taking ourselves seriously. And if we write on a regular basis, whether it's for ourselves, whether it's for product, we're writers.
Mhm.
If you do a writing class, you're a writer. That's kind of how I feel. I mean, that person who wrote, you're either a writer or you're not a writer, what would he define a writer? Perhaps if you're getting paid.
Mhm.
Well, I know some absolutely exquisite writers and poets who are not getting paid, who've dedicated their whole life to their craft. Does that not make them a writer or a poet? Poets who've been published in Poet Law, one of the best journals in the country, are friends of mine. Are they not poets? It's so narrow, but we're very quick to look through a narrow lens when it comes to something creative and how we measure ourselves against it.
Okay, so kind of digressed off the subject because I really want to be in the subject of you as a writer. So, can you tell me about your writing process? How does it work for you?
Well, I was pondering this, and I don't think I have one. I think and I think for a long time I tried to have a process, and I felt again, so what was my conditioning? There's got to be a system that I work towards. I've got to have a timeline. I read about all these writers who get dressed in their suits and sit at their desk, and then break for an hour for lunch and then go back to doing it. Well, maybe I'd get more done if I did that, but that's not my process.
Mhm.
I've had an awful lot of shoulds in my life. And so I don't want to make that part of my creative process. I should write every day. Well, I probably should, frankly, and I don't. Um, but I always write when I'm feeling, and I feel a lot. So I know that if I said nothing else to myself, then you're going to write when you're really feeling something, feeling emotional somehow, feeling sad, feeling annoyed, which has been a lot of that lately, given the political state over here. If I just say I'm going to write when I'm feeling, then I write a lot. Um, if I'm putting myself into a self-imposed class, which sometimes I do, I say, okay, I'm going to take the next 2 months and put myself into my own class. Then I write every day in the mornings in bed. And
Yeah.
then I write by hand every morning. I think you know this about me. And then on Saturday, I type everything up that I've written by hand onto my computer. And I do that for 8 weeks. And then all of a sudden at the end of the year, and I give myself an exercise, like I might pick a poet like Lala or Frank O'Hara I was doing recently, read their work and kind of write in the flavor of their voice. And whilst I'm doing some of my method writing exercises, re-familiarizing what I'm teaching. And I'll do that for 2 months. When I'm teaching some of my classes, the 5 week programs, if I give an exercise I think is quite fun, I might play around with that myself. I mean, I'm always writing, Ria, in some capacity, whether I'm at the Getty Museum on a date with my favorite painting, or whether I'm out walking Daisy and I'm suddenly like, oh my gosh, I have like notes in my phone or voice memos to myself. And I'm like, what was that? Where did that come from that I wrote that? And I might use it for something and I might not. But I see the world through the lens of a writer, which is in details of my mood, details of my upsets, details of the world.
Mm.
So it's not a formulation of a process so much as it's kind of how I live now.
Yeah.
But if I'm working on product, the process takes a different flavor then.
Mm. So I want to come back to that.
Yeah.
But what I do want to pick up on is you said about writing whenever you're feeling. You feel a lot and you're writing. I think you said something like, I write when whenever I'm feeling. We'd have to go back to the recording to find out what you exactly said. But I know you didn't say, I write when I'm feeling good or write when I feel like it. So can you say a little bit about writing about when you...
Sometimes some of my best work comes when I don't want to write.
Mhm.
The same way that, sometimes I have my best moments in meditation when I have to drag myself to do it. So I'm not I'm not waiting to be inspired, if that's what you're asking. Oh my God, no. Inspiration is for amateurs when it comes to writing or anything creative. You know, no, don't ever wait to be externally referenced for your craft. Then you're at the whim of everything outside of yourself, where we are the most creative things we have. So whether I feel like it or not, I will write. Now, if I'm in an 8 week session with myself, there's not even a conversation in my mind about whether I feel like doing it. I might write shit for 4 days. I'm still going to do it because that's what I'm doing. Um, but I'm not waiting to be inspired by some great idea, because those great ideas, they come from my intellect and what I already know about life. And I'm looking for something, a surprise to happen on the page, which often happens when it's the last thing I want to do.
Mm.
So creativity is like air. It's, for me, it's like, it's always there to breathe until I die. And so I'm not going to rely, oh, I think I'm just going to breathe right now because I feel like I'm going to. You know, it's always part of how we live as human beings, creativity is. And so it's whether we make time for it. That's the bottom line. The discipline is not doing it. The discipline is making time for it.
Mm.
And that's a much bigger picture than just sitting down and forcing oneself to write.
Mm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. Yes. So you said your writing process is different when you're writing products then. So can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, like I learned a long time ago that writers need deadlines. And so if somebody wants something from me, they need to say, I need this by Sunday, and then I'll do it. So those are the two times I sit down with an idea in my mind of what I'm about to write towards, whether I'm getting paid or have a deadline, you know, and that's the same for all writers. Other than that, you should sit down with nothing on your mind, as you well know, and you do very well. So if I'm writing to product, it's definitely a discipline then. So when I was writing my movie, it took 2 years, and my girlfriend Didi, and she's a writer and has written movies before, and they've been made. And she and I would meet at my house twice a week for 3 hours, and I would lay on the sofa, and she would type in First Draft, which is a software package. And we were diligent. She had a young child. I had a big job at the time. We were super busy, but we would do that twice a week till our movie was finished. Mm-hmm. When I was writing my poetry book, I had Jack gave me a deadline, you know, so I had a deadline to work towards. When I was writing the book with Stella, you know, we sort of had a deadline. We had picked an event that we wanted, a conference we wanted to launch the book at, so we had to have it finished by then. So if it's like I have a book coming out next year and I know I've got to, yes, I work really well under a deadline, and I think most writers do. Otherwise, you know, we just drift along forever.
Yeah, so the next thing I'd like to ask about is your editing process, because I know editing and crafting your work is a big part of the process, as it should be for most of us, actually.
As it should be for everybody, yeah, exactly. The hardest thing for me to learn in editing my work was to kill my darlings, and I still have a hard time with that. So you write something, you're like, oh my gosh, that's so great, you know, I love that sentence. And then you're like, oh my God, but it doesn't work with what I'm writing. But I just want to keep the sentence. So one of the things, you know, I've really become quite disciplined at is killing my darlings. It's not like I lose them altogether, because more often than not, the sentence is better for a stanza in another poem or in a prose piece somewhere else. So I keep them all in my phone, notepads of them. Are you asking me like how I edit?
Yeah, the actual process of your editing would be good.
Well, it's complicated because very often what I think I'm writing is not actually what I'm writing. Mm-hmm. So I have to adjust myself to what has actually shown up on the page and what's trying to be spoken to in the world. So then I have to adjust my own self around that, because if I'm editing it with the eyes of what I thought the piece was when I started, then I'm going to force frame it into something that it isn't, because I'm going to make it be what I thought it was going to be at the beginning. Very frequently, I'll start writing something, even if I have a deadline, and then I'll be like, oh, this isn't developing into what I thought it was going to be. So then I have to actually edit myself first. I have to recalibrate internally, and because I just don't want to force feed writing, you know, I don't want to force anything. So I'll edit myself initially. So I'll shift my perspective to what the piece is telling me that it wants to be, because there's definitely an alchemy for me in how I write. I'm not sort of intellectually motivated by ego when it comes to writing, because I believe that would be such a small part of what could be offered on the page. So if I'm trying to muscle, this is a great story, I really want the world to hear about this, I'm missing what actually could arrive. So the first thing I have to do is edit myself if something on the page turns up a little differently. If it then turns up a little differently, I want it to be as exquisite as it can. So, you know, any indulgence on my part has to go. Have I said the same thing 3 times because I think this is a really good point and I want people to get it? So I'm going to say it a bunch of different ways. So can I say it one time really well, where people are going to be like, that's a good sentence? Perhaps not the sentence structure, but what's being said beneath it. And a lot of cutting. I am the queen of cutting, cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting, because, you know, when I ran my editing group, that was something that was very apparent that needed to, for everybody to do, to cut and to cut and cut. And when people do short poems in my program, which you've done, did a brilliant job, by the way, you realize how, you know, how many words we use, you know, to say something. And yeah. So my process is, if I'm writing, you know, I put myself into a self-imposed 8-week class. I write and write and write by hand every day. I transcribe everything over onto my computer on a Saturday morning. This all happens in bed. And as I'm doing that on a Saturday morning, I'm cutting as I go. So I'm doing my first edit that way. Oh, this was a terrible, I'm not going to put that in. But I might take what I wrote on Wednesday and add it to Thursday. That might be kind of interesting. I could play with those 2 things together, but I'm going to take out the 3rd paragraph. So I'll do a soft edit that way. When I was editing my poetry book, I was editing until the day before it was published, because I was like, with poetry, you can always see a better way to do it. There's always something you can take out. And I think, you know, you can edit forever. I think it's Richard Jones, the poet, who has all the variations of his poetry, like lined up against the wall. The first copy, the second draft, the third draft, the fourth draft. And he, in case he's cut something out from early on that he actually wants to put back in later.
Yes.
So, you know, everybody's got their way of doing it. I don't do that. I don't go back and think, because I would go crazy if I felt like I needed to. I do keep the first draft. I don't keep every draft in between. If I have 10 drafts of something, I'll probably keep 4, because I want to see the trajectory of whether my editing is making the focus that I want it to make with the piece. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. I've learned something in there. That's great. And another thing about editing yourself while you were writing, like there's already, even while you're writing, there's already a process, there's already an awareness of what's coming onto the page. And yeah. No, I really love that. I can't say any more about that, really.
Yeah, it's the difference of where we want to write from. Do we want to write from our head, or do we want to write from our heart? And our, you know, the head often takes the reins, and your ego and your intellect is not your friend when it comes to creating art.
So, and it's probably linked with editing, maybe, I don't know yet, but so I only found out a week or so ago that you've got a form of dyslexia. And I know at least one person that I've been working with has got dyslexia and feels that that's a barrier to her writing. But can you say what you see about that?
Well, I can, but you probably want to do an interview with my sister when her book's published, because so my mom has dyslexia and my sister has dyslexia. And I would say my mom has it the worst. My sister has it pretty badly, and I have it in a much softer fashion, where I'll often see a sign and I'll read it in a way that it's not written, or I'll write words down, and sometimes even when I'm speaking, I get them muddled in my mouth as they come out. So there's just kind of a misfiring there somehow. But you know, it's my sister graduated from her master's program as Student of the Year, and you know, she's very dyslexic. And I just think it's interesting, you know, what barriers we create for ourselves. Oh, I can't. So for me, it was grammar. So dyslexic, if you have a lean towards dyslexia, and grammar it's like, what? Strunk and White, for anybody who knows that book, it's like Chinese to me. I don't understand like what's being asked of me. My brain just cannot work that way. The same way that if you send me like, it's very hard for me to read the instructions of something and understand it. It doesn't equate like that. So perhaps this is why I try to make sense on the page, because when I read so much, it doesn't make sense to me. But it's, we create the barriers of our craft. It's almost like saying, you know what, I can't paint because I really don't know what to do with the color red. It kind of reminds me of when my dad was angry as a child. It's like, it's silly. And bless our hearts as humans, for decades I said, Jules, my grammar sucks, and so I can't be a writer. And I believe that. I don't even think about it now. I mean, I have so much to say as a textured human being, and I'm sure the person on your program they wouldn't be on your program if they weren't a textured human being with a lot to say. But look at what we tell ourselves. Oh, I don't have an MFA. Oh, I didn't do English literature at college. Oh, I haven't done enough classes. Oh, somebody said to me the other week, oh, but I'm a very left brain academic, so I don't really think I can write. I mean, come on, people. If you can write, you can write. I have, low tolerance of my own excuses, and I have, low tolerance of my students' excuses, because it's nonsense, Ria. It's nonsense. If you can write a sentence, you can write a poem. If you can write an email, you can write a prose piece.
Okay, so can you say just a little bit about
let me just add one thing to that. My mom is 88. She's already written one book called Blossom and Me, about when she traveled the UK in her RV, and she's just about to, next year she's finishing her memoir. My mom, is very dyslexic, guys. Very dyslexic. When she found out she had dyslexia in her 70s, she burst into tears and thought, oh my God, that's what it's always been. Because her whole life she felt there was something innately wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with my mum. She's a fabulous woman and has lots to write about.
Oh, lovely. Just shows as well that it's never too late to start either.
Oh, it's never too late to start, and it's never too early to start. There's no right time to start. You just start when you start.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. So how did you get your book published? I know a lot of people would want to know about that.
So it's, my poetry book was self-published through the publishing company Baz Van Press, who are friends of mine here in LA. They did a fabulous job. And the Nanny Chronicles of Hollywood was published through a publishing company up in Seattle. And Stella is Nanny Stella from Nanny 911, who I think you're going to be interviewing with at some point soon. A very dear friend of mine, an absolute hoot. You guys will have so much fun. We had a literary agent in New York, but if you're going to write about, something like nannies for the entertainment industry, you're going to get people interested. And we had a literary agent who we met through a friend of ours who'd written a book. So, you just have to, the more you are in writing circles, the more you get to know people.
Yeah.
And we did have quite a bit of interest from big houses in New York, but we ended up going with a small company up in Seattle that were just all women. And we felt weren't going to push us for a lot of salacious material, because obviously both Stella and I had to be somewhat cautious about people's names, and also we didn't want to make people wrong about their parenting choices. We just wanted to write a funny book together, and that's what I mean. You see, process is very important to me more than product. Having fun and doing creative things together is very important for me with friends. So writing my movie, you know, we had a lot of interest at one point on this particular format we put it out. Whether it all ever gets made or not, and I don't really care. You know, it was working with Didi and doing it with an absolute joy.
Mhm.
Walking with Stella and flying back and forwards to Seattle and putting our book together was an absolute joy. And so, um, you know, so there's no one way anymore. The beautiful thing about the literary world is that there's so many ways to get your work into the world, and self-publishing is becoming, and thank goodness it's becoming the way to go, because now, you know, people can say, hey, I wrote a book, and you can get it on Amazon, or some cases in the bookstore. And my friend just had a chapbook published, and she worked with a publishing house, and so they said, you know, you'll buy the first amount of copies, and we'll pay for all the advertising and you know, all the formulating of the book. So there's no one way to do it. And I think people get intimidated by the idea of, how am I going to find a literary agent? And I know a girl who just had a book. She's a young girl. She just had a book published from an article that she wrote on the Huffington Post. And she wrote about feminism in America during in a college environment. And it was very interesting because it was relevant. This was about 4 years ago. It wasn't recently. When there was a lot of talk about what was happening to young girls in college. You know, there were some situations that were unsavory at the time. And, you know, publishing houses in New York, they will look through the Huffington Post, Thrive Global for interesting articles. She got approached, didn't even have a book, and said, well, you know, they flew to New York, she signed a 2-book deal with them. So you just don't know, but you're not going to do any of that until you write. It's like saying, you know, I'm at the top of the mountain and, oh my God, I'm terrified now. I could fall off because I don't remember how I got here. You've got to know how you get where you're going first. And that means you've got to get in the trenches of your craft, which is you've got to start writing.
Yeah. So can you say something now about the difference between method writing and what most people see as writing, like creative writing? Or
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. Well, I think that there's a lot of really great programs out there for people to do when it comes to writing. And I've done a lot of them. I've done poetry prompt classes. I remember my first class I ever did, my first writing class was at Santa Monica College. I was the oldest person there, and I couldn't stop smiling. I think they all thought I was crazy. Like, what's that woman doing at the back, just smiling? I was just like, oh my God, I'm in a writing class. You know, it was so exciting for me. I didn't care what I did while I was there or what I wrote. The fact that I had signed up and gone to a class was just a thrill. I mean, it wasn't a great class. I didn't really learn how to write. I wrote more, but I didn't learn to write any better. And I've done some great poetry prompt classes. Okay, write about what the color burgundy tastes like. And you've got 5 minutes to write a 5-stanza poem. You're just like, oh gosh, you know. I've done that. I've never been invited to find myself on the page the way I have through method writing. It's like when I learned the transformation line massage, you know, the what's the story of my life and truth of who I am on the page, I was like, okay, I'm hooked. It was like, if you're going to write about people for people, you've got to write about the 3 things I'm always talking about: conflict, drama, and human struggle. That's what we're interested in, right? We're narcissists as human beings, and we're voyeurs into other people's life. That's why we slow down on the freeway when there's an accident. We just want to have a good look and see. Or we just want to have a good look and see at other people's lives on the page, whether it's a fiction, autobiography, memoir, poem, whatever it is. So it could have been another program for somebody else, but for me, it was this program. And it was like, now I know how to put myself on the page. How do I show myself on the page? And then how do I make my writing dexterous to a reader so that they're going to be like wanting to read more? And how can I not be frightened of myself? And I think my poetry book kind of really was an example of that, an exercise in that. How can I not be scared of my life, but use it as as my art.
Mm.
And so my poetry book was that for me. If the Nanny Chronicles of Hollywood was my, like a fun popsicle, a straight talk popsicle, then, I Want a Stonehenge Life, kind of the title says it all, right? It was the lost world of my life, that book. It was the coming to age of myself as a human being, all my loves, all my losses, all my pains, all my confusions of everything. And I could only do it because I had done this program. And I probably wouldn't ever have done it if Jack hadn't said, it's time to do your book now. I mean, I wasn't, and I never have written to product. It's the annoyance of so many of my friends who are creatives, who are churning out product by the boatload, and they don't understand my hesitancy. They've stopped now assuming that it's my insecurity because I've got work in the world. It's not my insecurity. They realize that now. It's just that it's the craft and the art of process that enlivens me to my core. Now, product obviously comes from that. So my book that's coming out next year is called Dear God, Letters from an Agnostic. And that came because I've been writing to God for about 2 years now. Not because someone said, why don't you write a great book to God? And the title, it was like, oh God, yeah, letters to God, dear God, letters from an agnostic. It's like all the complications of my relationship with God, whatever God might mean to somebody, I hope I'll be able to paint on the pages of that book. But not because I'm writing to the title. The title came because I was writing through the process. The same way that the title for my Stonehenge book came because I was writing through the process. I want a Stonehenge life. What does that mean? Well, it was probably a lot of what I wrote about. It wasn't a lot of that, And that's the complexity of the human experience. We often want to be something that we're not, and we don't see what we already are. And I think maybe that's what method writing, that's a nice way of saying it. See how that just happened? That's what happens. That's why I carried on with Jack for 17 years.
So I could talk all day. I need to cut it a little bit short now, though. So I'm just going to ask you one last question, if that's okay. So anybody out there who's new to writing, new to thinking that they want to write a book, or at the very early stages of writing a book, what advice would you give them?
Okay, so that's okay. You've got to write. Bottom line. I was living in the Hollywood Hills with a cousin, and I said to a friend of mine at the time, this was back in the early 80s, the early 90s, I want to live on a boat in the Marina Del Rey here in Los Angeles. And she said, and I said, but I don't know how to do it. And I don't know how to get there. And I don't know, like, how do you find a boat? And if you find a boat, how do you pay your bills? And how does the electricity work? Can you have a TV on the boat? That's what writers do before they start writing. I don't know what I want to write. Well, I think I want to write a memoir. What if I can't write? And then what if I can't get a publisher? Let me go research self-publishing before just write. So my friend said to me, Jules, if you want to live on a boat, go down to the marina. And I said, well, what am I going to do in the marina? And she said, I don't know, walk around. So I thought, that's just insanity to me. I mean, what a waste of time. I want to sit in the Hollywood Hills trying to work it out up here about how I'm going to get it done. But I didn't. I drove to Marina Del Rey. I walked around. I looked at the boats. I felt a beating of excitement in my heart. Went into a coffee shop, had some lunch, went into a liquor store, and then in the corner was a bunch of newspapers and magazines, and one was called the Marina Del Rey newspaper, whatever it was, classifieds. Picked it up, and of course, there I found I moved onto a boat 6 weeks later, and I lived on boats in the marina for 7 years, and that's how I met my ex-husband. But it wasn't going to happen for me trying to work it out somewhere else. The same way that somebody's not going to work out what they're going to write before they start writing.
Yeah.
Just write something. And the most important thing is take a writing class, whether it's with me, whether it's at the local college, whatever it is. Put yourself, that's, take a writing class. It's like me going to the marina.
Yeah.
It's like put yourself in the environment and see what happens.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be in class with other people who want to write as well. And you're going to have that moment of excitement and terror that I felt at Santa Monica College. Oh my God, here I am. You're going to show up for something that you've been thinking about. But we live in our thinking about what we want to do and our dream. Oh, I can't do it. Just stop the nonsense. Take a writing class. Get your feet down into the marina. Look for a boat. Get yourself onto the page. You're not going to do it if you don't have support. If you were, you would have done it by now.
Mm.
Get yourself into a writing class. When I was driving home from LA, from my office in LA, when I was working in my other job before I retired, I was driving along thinking, oh, I really want to write more. I want to write more than just being with Jack. I don't know how to do it. Blah, 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 all up here. And then I pulled out Annie Lamott's CD, put it into my recorder. And the first thing that Annie Lamott says, if you want to write more, start a writing group. And I came straight home, put 2 sentences on Facebook. And within 4 hours, I had my group. And we met, I think, almost for 4 years. Every week at my house, and I became incredibly close to these amazing women, and it ended up being more like an editing group. So you have to get out of your way. I do as well. As human beings, we have to get out of our way, stop trying to think that we can think our way to something, and actually do something a little different, which is sign up for a class, immerse yourself in the process with other people who have a dream as well, and then see what happens.
Yeah, I love that advice. I love my classes with you, Jules. The people in the groups, like I've been doing it for 2 years, so there's been a number of groups and different people have come and gone, and it's just been so lovely to be in amongst people who want to write. It's just such a nice environment, and it really spurs you on, doesn't it? I know it spurs me on, wanting to be a better writer, being with a group of people who all want to be better writers.
So Ria, when you think back to when you first took the class with me and where you are now, if anyone had said to you 2 years ago, you're going to run a course for writers, which you're going to have people beating down the doors to do, and you're going to have your own publishing house, you would have scared yourself into doing nothing. But
Yeah.
what did you do? You just did a writing class and then life started to show you what it had for you.
God, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Even the beginning of this year, I wouldn't have thought I would be doing what I'm doing now. Just stunning. So
Then that's how it happens. Life meets us at the place of our action. It doesn't meet us at the place of our thinking. So life meets us at the place of our action about our dreams. It doesn't meet us at the place of our dreams in our head.
No.
It just doesn't. People will argue against that. Oh, well, no, I like to have a list of ideas. And my attitude to that is, what if there's a better list? Yeah. And you just haven't seen it. You haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Because this would have never been the dream in my head. Like this is the dream that's come through without me having a logical plan for it. So
Ria, my writing program, I couldn't have dreamed this up. This wouldn't have been close to my best possible dream for myself. It's and that's what I mean about, but you have to do something different, which means you have to take a writing class or join a writing group or go to Facebook and put a notice up and say, I want to write and I want some people to write with me and who's interested, and see what happens. Just, do something different.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jules. We need to finish now. Really. But before we do, I just want to give you the opportunity to say, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, find out what you're up to in the world, find out about the classes, how do they find you?
JulesSwales.com. Everything is there. I'm thrilled to say that I'm pretty full for the January classes already, but I do have some spots left for the entry level students on the Thursday morning California time. I think there's about 4 spots left. Other than that, we're full. So I'm, you know, that's exciting. Thank you all for those of you who sign up with me on a regular basis. That's always lovely. And if anybody wants to have a conversation with me, you know, just a one-on-one conversation about creativity and where they are with their process, I'm more than happy they can reach me through my website. You'll put it in the little link below or something, won't you?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jules. That's been just a wonderful conversation. I knew it was going to be, but thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, and it's been wonderful for me here as well. Like I hear myself say things like I've never said before, just chatting to you, you know, and I've been interviewed quite a lot and I'm like, oh God, this is how it happens. You just show up and life shows up with you. So thank you for that. It's been fabulous. Always lovely chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you very much.